the class also today make it, I think, with difficulty. They persevere and they are here early in the morning to attend this session. Yesterday we, as usual, end up around 10 o'clock. And of course I myself woke up to midnight. And this morning we have our usual meditation and so on. And so I usual apology that these lectures are not properly prepared, and we must thank Nagasena for these are the notes related to his research. Because of that, we have some kind of notes in order. This is just to facilitate our discussion, and we shall continue to discuss on the topic on this very interesting, although a short sutra called Vimukta Ayatana Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. We are in the course of examining the Dhamma as creative education. That is the research topic of Nagasena. And in this particular sutta, we see actually very concretely, we can understand what really is meant by creative education and what this process is actually like. So from this perspective, it's important, even though a short discourse. Yeah, Vimukti Ayatana. So we have Vimukta Ayatana. We translate this as the support base for Vimukti, that is liberation. And firstly, remind ourselves what is meant by creative. Why do we call it creative education? Because we believe that the Dhamma is training whereby the trainee comes to be progressively transformed. That is important, transform. At higher and higher levels. So the trainee, if successful, experiences new dimensions of experiences, gaining new insight. And you can say that experiencing the unfoldment, experiencing in a new way, the unfoldment of human potentiality. And I emphasize the word new many times. I repeat it deliberately to underscore what we mean by creative. When you say something is creative, it's not just confined to art. It can be any experience. Here we are in the domain of spiritual experiences, in the domain of religion, in the domain of the Dhamma. And here, creative indicates something that is not stereotype, the simplest way to understand it. Not something that is old, that is using a contrasting word, that is the result of reactive kind of experience, but creative because precisely you come to new dimension, you come to new levels, you gain new insight. Hence, creative. And this year we have discussed the importance of the contact of spiritual friends. We emphasize that the process of spiritual transformation, Dhamma as a system of creative transformation, requires the context of spiritual fellowship, the context of spiritual friendship. We need a teacher, and the Buddha is the creative teacher par excellence. In the absence of the Buddha, we need other fellow practitioners. Of course, so brahmacharis. We need support of them. We need instruction from them. We need inspiration from them. As we need, given this context, that we can grow and we can embark on what we call the creative process. So we started by examining the importance of spiritual fellowship, kalyana mittata, and we looked at a couple of suttas, and then we went on to see the process of spiritual transformation, particularly coming to this sutta called Vimutta. As I said, we see very concretely, and the Buddha has said that there are 5 ayatanas, the 5, if you like, foundations, 5 supports, 5 support bases for liberation. So the Dhamma has only one aim, and that is the aim of liberation. Just as the Buddha has emphasized that all his teachings have only one taste, the taste of liberation from dukkha. So it's liberation from the human predicament. And this is how we look at, how we appreciate and understand the Dhamma as creative education. And in this sutta, the Buddha says that there are 5 bases, 5 support bases for this liberation. And liberation is explained as liberation of the mind, liberation from asavas, that is from our outflows of all the negativities, and hence paving the way for perfect spiritual insight. And with the spiritual insight, we gain what is called anuttara yoga kemang, which we have translated as supreme spiritual security. That is Nibbana. And in this context, the Buddha speaks of 5 support bases. And we have looked at the first one. The first one is a case where a creative, you might call it this way, we deliberately use these terms, a creative listener or learner comes to be transformed spiritually in the very process of listening to the Dhamma. So this is the first one we have examined last week. And today we continue to look at the other cases, the other support bases that the Buddha explains. Very briefly, this is just a rough way of putting it, to have the exact expression, you should look at the Pali, and we examine the Pali, we analyze every word and all the grammars. Today is not the occasion for this kind of analysis in a brief sharing. So I'm just giving some indication in kind of rough English expressions. So the first we can say is the case of listening to Dhamma creatively. Let us use this word deliberately. Number 2 is a case of teaching. Now we come to this today now. The teaching of the Dhamma as it has been heard and it has been fully mastered. So the first is listening, now teaching. Then the third is the case of reciting, repeatedly reciting to oneself the Dhamma that has been heard and that has been fully mastered. And the fourth one is continuously, you can say, reasoning about or pondering over, investigating and examining in the mind the Dhamma as it has been heard and fully understood. This is the fourth one. And then the fifth one is a case of meditation. Meditating on meditations like samadhi nimitta, properly grasping the sign of meditation, and in this case, the Dhamma that you want to understand, and attending to it, sustaining it properly, and penetrating it with wisdom. And these are the words of the Pali. And in this way, gaining liberation. So these are the five-fold support bases. As we have said just now, we discussed the first one, and we proceed to number 2 to number 5 today. These 5 support bases actually represent 5 ways of practice. 5 ways of spiritual practice leading to liberations. 5 ways through which we can make use of the Dhamma to transform ourselves creatively. It is also a teaching of 5 types of temperaments in terms of the practitioners. There are different, Buddhism from the beginning recognizes that there are different types of temperaments, different type of capacities, different kind of, you can say, faculties. You have the intellectual type, you have the meditative type, you have the devotional type, and so on. So we can put it this way. These 5 bases, the description of these 5 bases represents a description of 5 types of practitioners, 5 types of temperaments. The first one is the creative listener, someone who is capable of being spiritually receptive, the right, if you like, pupil. When the pupil is ready, as it were, the guru appears. So you have got to have the right receptive pupil. So given the pupil like this kind of practitioner, the person comes with transform in the very process of listening. We'll get into it a little bit more in a few minutes. And the second one is, we can say, the creative teacher. The teacher who is spiritually endowed with the proper qualities such as compassion, wisdom, commitment, and so on. We have discussed that. And of course, rightly motivated. So in the process of teaching also, it's very interesting. It's an extremely interesting part of this discourse. In the process of teaching also, one comes to be spiritually transformed. One comes to be creatively transformed. The second type. The third type, you can call this the religious type, for one or a better term, to describe the type who feels inspired in reciting the sutras, in reciting what he has learned and he has understood regard to the Dhamma. The fourth type, we can call this the intellectual type. You see, interesting, Buddhism gives place to the intellectual type. And this is a case of, if you like, the spiritual realization, spiritual practice through intellectual study. And number 5 is the type as meditator, the meditative type. One gains insight through the practice of meditation. So there are many ways to appreciate this discourse. And we can learn a lot about the Dhamma not just as a religion in the ordinary sense, certainly not in the normal, if you like, Western sense of the term religion, but as a process of transforming a human being, an individual, spiritually, creatively, and enabling the trainee to be enlightened, to unfold his or her potentiality as a human being to the highest. Firstly, we have to remind ourselves that for this creative process to occur, for us to benefit from the Dhamma as a process of transformation, spiritual transformation, there are prerequisites that we have discussed. So very briefly, since we have discussed last week, we will just remind ourselves, in this sutta, as far as the description in this sutta is concerned, we find three important terms. The first one is appamatta. The trainee, the spiritual practitioner, should be appamatta. Second one is atapin, and the third one is pahitatatta or pahitatta. Pahitatatta. The first one can be rendered as heedful. In fact, this word is connected with the notion of mindfulness. So also mindful, heedful, cautious, and not being slack, and so on. Atapin connotes the idea of earnest striving, making serious effort, and pahitatta connotes the idea of being mentally resolute, completely committed, completely devoted to the Dhamma. So we have been talking about the Dhamma as creative, the process of creative education, creative transformation. And we have to remind ourselves that for this to be meaningful, we have to understand that there are these prerequisites. Heedfulness or mindfulness, and serious effort, earnest striving, and mental commitment and resolute devotion. So now we come to the second support base, second ayatana for liberation. And that is a case of teaching the Dhamma as it has been heard and fully mastered. As I said, this description is extremely important, and we can go so far as to say, without exaggeration, that if this description by the Buddha is properly appreciated and understood, we actually, Buddhists can offer something important to modern system of education. Because this is teaching, if you like, as creative education. So if we apply it to the modern system of education, we can help to revolutionize the education system. And so, in other words, education is not just a mere process of imparting knowledge, a mere process of providing information. To be learned in the modern sense, it must be a process that transforms the learner fully, completely, as a human being, in all its respects. A process to unfold his potentials to the highest as a human being. And it is in this sense that we call Dhamma creative education. You know, as I said last night, in my career as a university teacher at the University of Hong Kong, and I have come across some students who are in the Department of Buddhist Studies, and they are eager to do PhD, you know, on Buddhism as creative education. But I'm afraid that these few people who, in spite of the sincerity, do not seem to understand the whole concept of the Dhamma as creative education. And I do not share the approach that they adopted in analyzing Buddhism as creative education. What I want to emphasize is that first, to do a research like this, we must sincerely go deeply into the suttas themselves. We have to understand what can we find in the suttas. From the Buddha's teachings, the suttas themselves. How the sutta explains the Dhamma as a process that transforms a human being creatively. And what is this process? What does it consist in? And what are the case studies that we can gather from this description in the suttas? It is only when when we investigate like this that we can appreciate how the Dhamma can transform, how it's indeed an education system, but not an ordinary one that transforms creatively. So, what the Buddha is saying here is that when someone teaches the Dhamma, it's not just only the learner, the listener, who is benefited, who grows. Actually, the ideal is that there must be a dynamic interaction between the teacher and the student. And in this process, the teacher also grows. The teacher also comes to be transformed. I think I have mentioned that in the Buddhist scriptures, there are mentions of examples where a preacher at the very seat as he is preaching, as he preaches, at the seat of his preaching, he gains liberation. He gains breakthrough. Now this is the type of thing we want to learn. The type of thing that should be especially interesting for us today, right? To understand how, in this sense, Buddhism is creative education. So, it's not teacher in the ordinary sense then. And in fact, not every teacher of the Dhamma can benefit in this manner, can be transferred creatively. So there are prerequisites that we have to be mindful about. Firstly, of course, the teacher has to be spiritually motivated. He must be mindful. That is why Buddhism stresses so much on mindfulness, stresses so much on right motivation. He must be mindful that he is teaching the Dhamma for the sake of his own spiritual growth as much as for the spiritual growth of the student. He doesn't teach it as a matter of duty. a matter of requirement. He doesn't teach as a job, as a mere job. That teaching itself is his spiritual practice. And through this practice, he's not spending time as just, a teacher who is paid and who is given a job description. And these are the jargon, these are the terms, we come across in the system of education. You belong to an institution. You have to fulfill a number of hours, you have to teach a certain manner as expected by the institution. And you have to produce students who will give good results, etc., etc., you see. And often this kind of job is very alienating, especially in the domain of teaching religions. You don't necessarily teach because you love it. You teach because you got a job. You are well paid. You have to get promotion, and so on. Huh? So, the type of teaching in which a teacher can be transformed should not be a job in this sense. It should be a spiritual practice that is done mindfully, and the teacher must be properly, you can say, spiritually motivated. So it also therefore presupposes all these qualities like faith and commitment. He's not teaching just as a mere scholar, a mere learned person. So we have to be aware that these are the preconditions and prerequisites for someone to be transformed spiritually. But the important point is that now teaching is just another method. It's just another situation of spiritual practice. So you can imagine that someone who is committed to Buddhism, who is committed to practice, but at the same time he functions as a teacher, maybe in a university, maybe in a school. But the person mustn't feel alienated in the sense that, I am a Buddhist, or I am a monk, or I'm a nun, but then I have to go to the institute to teach as a teacher. And I have to fulfill the expectation. Sometimes that is why one who is properly motivated, one who is a spiritual practitioner, indeed can be hindered in his practice. Because the teaching should be just as much as his chanting and meditation in the temple, and should be integrated in his whole life as a practicing Buddhist. But he can't do that. He is limited. He is restrained because of institutional demands, expectations. So that would not be the ideal situation. And therefore, if we consider teaching as a platform, as also just another situation for us to practice, then we have to also, at least for Buddhist teaching, at least where possible, consider the total environment, the total context, how these teachers can also be helped to grow through the very process of his or her teachings. Although it is not possible in, for instance, a government institution or a commercial institution which employs a teacher, say a monk or a nun, to do the job of teaching in the institution, but certainly we should consider in the case of, for instance, teaching in the temples, teaching in the Pirivenas, teaching as Buddhist institutions. We cannot model ourselves on external, worldly kind of institutions if we want to come near to this kind of ideal of transferring ourselves, of growing spiritually through the process of teaching. But certainly, the message here is that the ideal is that one can not only be transformed but even be enlightened, if you like, in the process of teaching. So as I said, if we pursue this ideal properly, to what extent can we arouse awareness in the case of even outside institutions that are not religious? In what way can we at least indirectly introduce elements of environments, introducing elements that can help to at least come nearer to the ideal of developing the person. We don't even have to speak in Buddhist terms, and we don't have to speak in terms of enlightenment, but certainly we can speak in terms of the growth of the person as a whole person, total being, as a teacher. And for example, in respect of interaction, how the teacher can be encouraged to interact dynamically, if you like, even spiritually, with the students. How the teacher can be allowed certain amount of freedom to teach in his way that can help him to realize his spiritual ideal. I think there are many things that we can certainly, it's not certainly not so easily done, but we can certainly consider properly from the Buddhist perspective, and in this way being enhanced. In this way, the modern education system can come to be enhanced from the perspective of Buddhist teaching. I certainly, in my case, well, certainly I'm not enlightened, as you can see, but I can say that it is my experience that as I teach, not only in a temple, not only, for instance, on an occasion like this, in a preaching, but even in the universities. To some degree, when I teach the Dhamma, I feel inspired. I feel excited sometimes when I share the Dhamma with the student. Of course, in some cases you're not allowed to, for instance, you're not supposed to preach, so we certainly can't preach. And in some countries, even today, I think you can understand what I'm referring to. When I lecture in certain universities, in certain countries, I can't tell people that you should take refuges in the, in the Buddha-Dharma Sangha and such things, or that you should spend your time, much of your time meditating. But there are many ways, in a relative manner, we can inspire ourselves as teacher. It all depends on our sincerity and our faith in the Buddhist knowledges that we are sharing with the students. So I would say that in my own limited experiences, I feel a lot of inspiration from my students. Sometimes, when you teach a certain doctrines to the students, you don't know whether these students are Buddhist or not Buddhist. There's no requirement for that, and you don't know how they are motivated. Is it spiritually, or is it because of wanting to pass the exam well? Taking a certain course to get credits that contribute towards their degree and so on. But very often, at least, there are some students who can inspire you who seem extremely interested in, what you have introduced from the Dhamma. Even in those countries which do not allow us to talk about religion, even indirectly. But sometimes, after my lectures, these students, they come near to me and say, "Oh, I'm so interested, I'm so excited, I'm so inspired by what you say about, this Buddhist teaching, this Dhamma. Can you tell me more?" And when you interact with these students, you feel that the Dhamma is actually helping them as a human being. And you are inspired that way. So there are many ways, even though not in the ideal way, but relatively, we can be inspired as a teacher of Dhamma. And certainly, much more easily, if it is the case of teaching in, for instance, the temple or religious center, where you can be more open, as it were, with your heart. And that is why often when I teach, I talk about my experiences, say at this center. Here, at least I'm free, I'm safe. And you can see that often I go beyond the time limit. When I'm supposed to teach for 2 hours, I teach for 3 hours. And it's that kind of excitement, that kind of benefit that I'm getting, I'm deriving as a teacher. So in this way, we integrate our teaching with our practice. And we make use of the teaching as a platform to transform ourselves. So, although there are difficulties, there are practical difficulties, they are not so easily done, as said. But if we have the awareness, if we raise this awareness of teaching as a platform to transform us, at least as human beings, of unfolding human potential. But today, this day, I think at least in some countries which allow more freedom, you can certainly come across emphasis, even in those worldly institutions, that teaching should be a holistic process. And they speak of the moral aspect, not necessarily in the religious sense, but the moral aspect, moral dimension of teaching as well. So I think in many ways, if you consider the Buddha's encouragement in such teaching like the one we are talking about today, we can find some ways, whether direct or indirect, to introduce elements of the Dhamma relating to this point, this aspect of teaching as a process of transforming ourselves as teacher. So this is the second base or support base for transformation. Thirdly, is reciting the Dhamma as it has been heard and as it has been fully mastered. This is also interesting because I just now label this roughly as representation of the religious type. Reciting the sutra, reciting the Dhamma is a common religious practice, certainly for Buddhists. And you can see that also in some other religions also. That is this practice of reciting. Now here, we find, therefore, an explanation of what we may call the spiritual significance of recitation of sutra. And this is certainly very much developed, for instance, in the case of Chinese Buddhism. One integral
part of Chinese Buddhist practice is precisely reciting the sutra. For instance, the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, and some people recite every day, and many times every day, in the morning, in the evening, and the Amitabha Sutta. There are many sutras. But certainly, it is not just, of course, not just the Chinese, not just the Mahayanis, and this practice of recitation is a very ancient one, and it is also an integral part of Theravada Buddhism. And for instance, just now you recite the 3 refuges. You can recite it mechanically, that's one way, and as part of the requirement of the custom, of the institution, and you simply recite, you start a religious function by reciting the refuges. That would not be creative. That is not what the Buddha is talking about. Recitation as a platform, as a support for creative transformation. But if you recite the refuges very mindfully, very sincerely, especially if you can do this as if each time when you recite, you are taking the refuge for the very first time in your life. If you can experience like that, then it is a new experience. To the extent that it's a new experience, to that extent it is creative. I believe that if we are sincere, if we are mindful, if we are properly motivated, we come to progressive appreciation, progressive realization of what it means to take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. When I look back, I took refuges myself when I was doing Standard 6 in the primary school, my last year of primary school. Of course, I was inspired by, friends of my grandmother and there are temples near me, Chinese temple, and but anyway, one day I joined them. I wanted to take refuges. I was just a small boy, because there was not much understanding at that time. But it was a wonderful experience. I felt that, I have taken refuges. I have become a Buddhist in a proper sense. So imagine that taking refuge at the time when I was about 12 years old, or a little bit maybe less. And then later on in my life, I kept on doing that. And then I learned to take the refuges in the Pali, chanting Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. And then now every time I also give the refuges to the devotees. So I have thousands of experiences chanting the refuges. And very often I feel that I'm getting higher understanding and higher realization what it means when I say Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. And sometimes it can be very touching for myself. So this is the case of getting the spiritual benefit of reciting refuges. And of course, there are many other types of refutation in the Theravada tradition also. And coming back to, for instance, to the example of recitation in the Chinese tradition, people who chant, for instance, who recite the Heart Sutra every day. When you recite, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. At the beginning, it just sounds inspiring and interesting. But if you chant it mindfully, and at the same time your chanting is integrated in your whole living, integrated with all other aspects of your practice, one day you feel, oh yeah, I understand more now what it means. When I chant, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So you come to, I think it should be a fairly common experience for those who are sincere and mindful. For those whose chanting is an integral part of your whole practice, then you come to, as I said, progressive levels, higher dimensions of appreciation, of insight into what you are chanting. And in this way, finally, you gain the true meaning of that very teaching. Now we saw that there are two important terms we saw last week in this decision by the Buddha, and in this process of what we call creative education, creative transformation. When someone either listens or teaches, and now we're talking about, or chanting as it has been heard. What is the term? Yatha Suttam. And as it has been fully mastered. Yatha Pariyattam. When someone does like this, given the right teacher, given the right pupil, given the right prerequisites, we saw what follows. Can you remember? The sutta says that that person comes to be inspired in respect of the atta, the meaning, and in respect of the Dhamma. Atta Pativedi, Dhamma Pativedi. These two are very powerful terms. It's not just a question of mere intellectual understanding, not just understanding the word, not just understanding grammar in Pali, not even understanding just a mere concept, but direct personal insight into that very Dhamma that he has heard, that he has mastered. That is Yatha Sutta, Yatha Pariyatta. I want you to keep on, again, this is itself a repetition. You recite this sutta. That is a very good example itself. I think this sutta should be recited repeatedly. And you will come to appreciate, you will understand the Buddha explanation in this sutta at a higher and higher or deeper level. So, along the way of this, what we call the process of creative transformation, you go through these stages of being inspired in terms of the meaning, in terms of the Dhamma. And from inspiration, what happens? Joy arises. And joy leads to excited joy. So from pamucca, you have piti. And from excited joy, finally, this excitement becomes tranquil. The excitement is calmed down in a spiritual manner. You get a new experience. I stretch the word new, hence creative. You come to a creative state of feeling spiritually tranquil. Physically. And from this bodily state of being tranquil, being calm, that word is very, very important. And certainly in the Yogacara Buddhism is much more so. You gain what is called pliability, spiritual pliability, workability, and of your body and then the mind. The whole process of transformation is a transformation of gaining this pliability of mind and body. First the body and then the mind as a whole. Your 5 skandhas come to be transformed. So anyway, in this, following this description, you come to this stage after the excitement. Your excitement calms down, and that kind of calming. That's why the tranquility is not ordinary calming down, not the ordinary relaxation like the type of relaxation when you lie down on the bed and or watching TV or something like that. But it's a new dimension of experience. It's a religious kind of, it's a spiritual kind of tranquility. So with this state of the body in spiritual tranquility, then you come to a state of mental bliss. And not ordinary happiness, not ordinary sukha, but mental bliss that is attained along this process of progressively higher and higher, if you like, more and more positive states of progress. That's called sukha. And when the mind is experiencing this state of subtle bliss, the mind comes to be fully unified, comes to be integrated, equipoised. And that's called samadhi. And then finally, the person is the mind is liberated. So, reciting the suttas, listening, reciting, all this as a platform, as a support base for liberation, for transformation, contain the description of the same process, same progressively positive process. So what I want to emphasize is there are these stages of being touched not in your brain only, but your heart. The pativedi connotes feeling directly, and not just knowing through your mind, not just through your computer, but your heart. And hence, the notion of inspiration is an appropriate one here. You become inspired. And when you're inspired, you begin to be transformed. The process begins. So this is certainly, you can see in the case of recitation, because it's a common practice. You recite it, but now, after listening to this, I hope that we can, when we recite a teaching, whether it's Pali, whether it's Chinese, whether it's Sanskrit, we know that there are prerequisites for it to be truly spiritually significant. It presupposes faith. It presupposes, we cannot shy away from the word faith, commitment, determination, motivation, and presupposes, of course, proper understanding, proper learning. So yatha suttam, yatha parayattam. So given all this, the process of recitation is not a mere mechanical ritual. Some people don't like it because it's just we don't like this ritual, and my brain is very good, I can understand, and I read it, that once is enough, I can write notes, I can type the notes on the computer, but it's very different. It's a practice. It's a transforming practice. It's an uplifting practice. It's an inspiring practice. It's a practice that moves our heart, that brings you to a higher and higher level. In that sense, creative. In that sense, transforming. So this is the platform, the case of the support of recitation. Then, next, you come to case 4, or support base 4, which give place to the intellectual. That's extremely interesting. Now, normally people think that if you are interested in the practice and realization, intellectual study is a hindrance. They think of these two as being mutually exclusive. We want to emphasize here in our little center that we should integrate practice and study. And we simply cannot, and we cannot afford to deny, in modern time especially, in modern context especially, to deny our need for intellectual understanding. We have that, and we have to make use of it. In a sense, we even have to satisfy this need for intellectual curiosity, intellectual searching, understanding. So Buddhism gives place to study rather than discouraging study. Of course, it depends on, now I'm talking in terms of the different personality type or temperament, because it depends on the type of temperament you belong to. Buddhism doesn't say that everybody has to be a scholar, has to be intellectual. But there are people, most people today in the modern society are intellectuals. At least that's an important part. That's why I say we cannot afford to deny that part of us. It's part of our being. I think you can share what I mean when I tell you that when we study, given the proper commitment and motivation, you feel excited as you study, and when you come to understand the Dhamma, you become excited. You become quite inspired. I see. I know what this term now, this concept in Buddhism now means. What the Buddha is trying to say, whether it's a Sanskrit term, whether it's a Chinese term, even or whether it is that concept, Buddhist concept, is expressed in English. You get so excited and inspired. So it's this kind of inspiration, given the right receptivity, right attitude, that is transforming, that's uplifting. So then, this fourth one says that when someone, even though he's not teaching, he's not listening, he's not reciting, not those three cases we mentioned just now, but someone who, as the teaching has been taught to him, as he has understood it fully, mastered it fully, accordingly as it has been taught, then he continues to think over as an intellectual. He ponders over, he thinks over, he reasons about, and he investigates, and he examines the mind. This is an intellectual process. But through this intellectual process, he also can come to be transformed equally. So it gives due place to intellectual understanding, intellectual study. In the path of liberation, in the path of practice. Of course, we have to remind ourselves, once again, all the prerequisites, mindfulness, commitment, and so on. You don't just study as a mere scholar. That's the difference, as a mere intellectual. But you study with the right motive. Why do I want to study Buddhism? Because I'm excited. I just simply want to understand what the Buddha was trying to tell me, right? What he intended in the sutras, or what the great master was trying to tell us in the Buddhist book. And I do that because I want myself to grow spiritually. So given the right mindfulness and motivation only, we can speak of intellectual study as a support base, as a platform for liberation. And finally, the fifth one is equally interesting. Is the case of the meditator. So to summarize up to this point, what the Buddha is saying is that you can come to gain liberation through the process of listening. But this listening is receptive, creative listening. Given the right teacher, given the right attitude, receptive attitude, mentality of the listener, you can also come to be transformed creatively by just the very process of teaching. As you teach, you transform, you grow, you transform yourself. Extremely interesting, as I said. You can also be the type who feels inspired easily through reciting the words of the Buddha, reciting the Dhamma, reciting a text from the Buddhist canon. Now, you can, fourthly, we are just saying, you can also do that. You can also gain liberation, or you can also at least get the support for liberation through intellectual reasoning and understanding, instead of denying it, instead of feeling it as a hindrance. Learn to integrate it. That's the secret. Integrate your study, your understanding with your practice. And now, so it gives, in other words, as I said, in the fourth case, this sutta gives a place, Buddhism gives a place to intellectual study. Now, Buddhism or this sutta gives a place to meditation. You can be the meditative type. And the type who feel extremely inspired when you meditate. Now that's not easy. Many people find it very difficult to get up to do meditation, for instance. Even like in Hong Kong on Sunday, you people are wonderfully exceptional. Not many people can make it to come here, especially on a day like Sunday. A day for you to go out for your outings, to meet your friends and enjoy many things. But you have chosen to come here, especially those, I admire those who were in the class up to 10 o'clock. When you go home, it will be at least 11. And by the time you sleep, it will be easily 12 o'clock. Every night I sleep well past midnight, of course, even though I live very near from here. And anyway, then in the morning, you have to get up, you have to do other things, and then you have to meditate. And sometimes you feel like it's a drag, it's a burden to you, And so it's not easy to do meditation. That the important thing now is you must learn to be inspired by your meditation. You must feel happy. You should learn to look forward to it. I certainly look forward to it every day, my meditation. Doesn't matter how busy I am. It doesn't matter whether it is New Year or this Sunday. Like for instance today, we have another session. I'm going to have another session with you after this break. But even then, I do my usual meditation in the morning as an additional session. Because I enjoy it. That's the important thing. We have to learn to enjoy and feel inspired by it. You have to learn to look forward to it. Then it can be creative. Then it can be transforming. Or then only it can be transforming. So meditation is certainly another way. Now we are talking about the fifth, another support base for liberation. And it can be a very effective one, very powerful one. So of course, once again, you have to be properly motivated. You must know why I'm doing meditation. Am I doing it because it's a requirement? Because I want to please others? Or am I doing it because I want to have psychic power? And many people do that, And they have to do the mantra because this mantra will give them power. And what's the reason for that? So for meditation to be transforming spiritually, to be spiritually significant, you have to be mindful of your motivation. You have to have proper motivation. That is why, in Buddhist practice, Samma Sankappa is very important. The right motivation, the right intention is very important. Always ask yourself, why am I doing meditation? Why am I practicing Buddhism? Why am I doing the chanting? No one can be, suddenly I am not. Or at least I believe that most people cannot just begin with 100% pure motivation. Because all our conditionings, all our motivations are tainted with craving, hatred, ignorance. It's a fact that we have to accept. But it doesn't matter. Start where you are. You can only start where you are. So it's a case of progressively purging, ratifying your motivation. And that requires commitment, requires understanding. That's why motivation is also preceded by samadhi. You must have the proper vision, proper understanding. And then the understanding must be moved further to your heart, not just your brain. It must go through your emotional aspect, not just your intellectual aspect. And then only you begin to really make the step, because your heart is moved. Your emotion, you begin to have motion. Only when your heart is stirred, and it must be stirred properly. That's why it must be based on samadhi. So these two are the first two steps of the Noble Eightfold Path. Given this, then you begin to meditate. Then you must learn to enjoy exercise. You must feel inspired by it, uplifting. Every time you meditate, you feel like you are coming to higher levels, new levels of experiences. Then it becomes truly creative. If you wait and want to just get up quickly and run away, then it defeats the whole purpose. So, for someone who is properly motivated, who is based on proper understanding, who is mindful, who is committed, and with all the prerequisites we have mentioned earlier, then meditation is certainly a support base for liberation. So this is included as a fifth in this sutta. And it says someone who has properly grasped a meditation sign, a nimitta, samadhi nimitta sukahitang, who has properly paid attention to it, sumanasikatam, who has properly maintained it, sustained it, and who has properly penetrated into it through panya, through wisdom. Given this process, then your meditation is a support base for liberation. You progress. And you're not just doing the mechanical procedure of sitting down and counting and whatever you do in a ritualistic, mechanical way. Every time you do, you are transforming yourself. In fact, meditation is really the most effective. In a sense, the only way. Of course, they must be properly understood, in that way. In that sense, meditation has a broader sense of just sitting down and or either sitting meditation, walk meditation, but it has a proper significance. But at least, I think it's correct to say that meditation is the most effective way. Well, your recitation also can be a kind of meditation. It can be a contemplative kind of meditation, by the way. Even your study, the focus of your mind on teaching with the right mindfulness and right motivation, commitment, as you study the sutta, that process itself can be meditation. But of course, in this fifth one, we are talking about, or the Buddha is referring to meditation in the proper sense, maybe you can say in a narrower sense, of coming to finally gain what is called mental equipoise, samadhi. So, with the proper meditation sign, for instance, that can refer to, or it can mean many things. For instance, you want to understand impermanence, and you meditate on it, and finally, you penetrate into this through wisdom. And through this process, important words follow, same note and watch, the same description. The person comes to be Atta Parisangvedi, Dhamma Parisangvedi, again. Can you remember what it means? Comes to be inspired in respect of the meaning, come to be inspired in respect of the Dhamma. And then in him joy arises. Then from pamujja, it comes to excited joy, the piti, and from piti, the body comes to be calmed down, tranquil in a spiritual manner, and with the coming down of the body, no more excitement, no more excited joy, you gain very profound mental sukha. We have seen all this. And finally, in this right constitutive state of mental bliss that is generated from meditation, not ordinary craving inducing bliss, but a mental bliss born of meditation. Then from that as a basis, the chittang samadhiyati, sukhino chittang samadhiyati. You see, for one who is blissful, who has gained meditation bliss, the mind is equipoise, is unified, samadhiyati. Or the mind of someone who is in this state comes to be blissful. So meditation is a blissful state. It should be a blissful state, positive state. Of course, at the beginning, you have to go through some pain, you have to struggle. But eventually, it should be an enjoyable experience. If not, there's something wrong about it. Then you have to review your meditation process. So, in this way, meditation is a very, very important, if not the most important in a certain sense, most effective way of creative transformation. So this is the fifth. So as I said, although this sutta is not very long, but powerfully inspiring, it tells us the 5 ways, 5 gateways, or 5 sort of ways through which we can gain liberation. We can belong to any of this type. We can be transformed by learning. Of course, receptively, spiritually, properly, and so on. Or by even teaching. Or by reciting. Or by intellectual understanding, analyzing. Or by meditation. Depending on your temperament. No one is excluded. No temperament is excluded. In fact, in reality, we can say that many of us are a mixture of all this, right? We can be the religious type, and we love to listen, we love to learn, and sometimes we love to teach. There's nothing wrong loving to teach, as long as it's not a neurotic attachment. But if you enjoy teaching the Dhamma, not for your personal recognition, not for your ego, but you feel inspired, simply understand, and you are simply mindful that it is a process of yourself to grow. At the same time, you are doing also service in Buddhism, sharing the Dhamma with others. That's a wonderful practice in your life, right? And teaching can be in many ways. It can be an informal way. It doesn't have to be always in the university or in a Buddhist institution. So every time you make use of your teaching of Dhamma, given the right mental attitude, right conditions, as a mean of growth, then you are practicing as a Buddhist. In one of these 5 ways recommended by the Buddha. So often we can be like this, and also at the same time, we love meditation. We love also study. In the history of Buddhism, there are great Buddhist teachers. There are some who are at once great intellectual and great meditators, and also a very faithful kind of person, very compassionate kind of person. You should not think that these are exclusive character types. You can have very emotional people, but at the same time highly intellectual. We know that. That is easy. But you can also have someone who is very interested in meditation and also very interested in study. They're great teachers, like I often give the example of, for instance, Shantideva, the 8th century great master, and who had produced a couple of important works, and one is called Bodhicharyavatara. Can you remember I told you? You see? Look at him. He's certainly a great intellectual. He expounds on emptiness masterfully. He is a Madhyamika master. At the same time, he is absolutely an emotional person, if you like. One endowed with spiritual emotion, spiritually motivated. He writes about the Bodhisattva, how one should fully devote to the awakening of Bodhisattva through various ways, and poetically. So he is a good example of a combination of a meditator and also someone who is devotional. His whole book is about devotion, basically, the Bodhicharyavatara. The type of devotion that you are chanting every Sunday. Like taking refuges, confessing your faults, rejoicing in marriage, sharing your marriage with all sentient beings. And those practices you know as Chinese Buddhists in Samantabhadra 10 vows, those are the subject of his book in the Bodhicharyavatara, but a profound scholar. So very often we are a combination of these temperaments, and in this way we can also benefit then from more than one ayatana, more than one support basis for liberation.